Hello and welcome to You Don't Play Boxing, Mirror Fighting's Influencer Boxing podcast. I'm Martin Dorman, joined by Harry Davies and by Donagh Corby. We are in three different time zones this week, so forgive us if the sound is terrible, the video is terrible, or indeed if one of us falls asleep. But hopefully we have enough to keep you entertained over the next half an hour because this weekend is Jake Paul, it's Nate Diaz. They will officially meet. We have in the last couple of hours had the weigh-ins, the behind-the-scenes weigh-ins, if you like, the official weigh-ins. Jake Paul came in at 185 pounds on the limit, needed a towel. Nate Diaz came in at 184.9 pounds, also needed a towel. Donagh, you were there. Let's get straight to this before we talk about the rest of it. Apart from the weight itself, seemed reasonably drama-free.
Yeah, I mean, look, these commission weigh-ins are always fun. It's interesting when like Jake comes in and does like a test weight, and like he's checking like what it's like with the towel and everything. But he appeared to make it. He told us afterwards that it was the easiest. His manager Nikisa Badarian told us afterwards that it was the easiest cut of his career. They said he cut too much weight for the Fury fight when he was 183 and three quarters. So he made the weight 185 today. He used the towel, but I'm sure if he really needed it, he would have been fine without that as well. So he and Nate Diaz both on the scales. Nate surprisingly needing the towel as well, given that he's fought as low as 155 pounds. So a over 2 stone difference for this one, 185. He came in at 184.9. So definitely no drama per se. I would have liked a little bit more drama, but some nice headlines for us anyway.
And Harry, Donagh sort of, let's assume that Jake Paul is telling the truth and it was an easy weight cut, that he's absolutely fine. But Donnagh's right about Nate Diaz, fought 155 in the UFC, 170 in the UFC. Is this just a case, do you think, that he's been very relaxed about this weight cut, not thought too much about it, and in the end maybe just been a tiny little bit tough in the last couple of days?
Yeah, it's a strange one, really. I mean, 185, like Donagh said, 2 stone difference is a massive jump. 30 pounds up from the 155 days. I know he's not fought at 155 since well before the Conor McGregor fight, I believe. So it's strange. Maybe a lot of people could look into it and say, oh, he must not be taking it seriously. But I think it just kind of goes into the way Nate is, and probably very relaxed about things. And, that's why he was one of the last ones to come in. So I wouldn't really read too much into it. If you do, people will probably be surprised when Nate goes out there and probably holds his own more than most people are expected to. So I feel like if he would have been the first one on the scale, and even if he was a couple pounds under, then people would be making a conversation. Well, oh, this is his natural weight. So it's kind of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. Because if he was under the 185 mark or like 182, people would be saying it's a mismatch weight wise, right? So I mean, at least they're pretty similar weights. So there's no sort of debate in that, right?
Yeah, we'll come to sort of the weight and what part that might play in the fight in a bit. The ceremonial weigh-ins will be later on in front of the fans, who I presume, Donagh, probably believe that what they're watching is them actually weighing in.
Yes,
unless you've read Mirror Fighting, of course.
Of course, and I presume they all do. The number one outlet for all of this carry on, and yeah, it was. I think like on the TikTok stream, we had people asking, "Isn't this at 5 p.m.?" And I had to sort of let them know. I had to be charitable and let them know. No, this is the real way in that only the professionals go to. But yeah, it's gonna be drama. There's gonna be a lot of drama. Obviously, we had the brawl yesterday at the press conference, which I'm sure we're going to get into, but it was and the lawsuit and maybe not a lawsuit. Now Jake's saying there won't be one, so lots of drama, and we'll see if they do a face-off, because it wasn't the fighters that got into it; it was the security teams who are the ones supposed to stop Jake and Nate getting into it. So we'll see just how much drama they allow tonight at the open workouts. But it'd almost be as good a story if they didn't face off. We've seen them twice now go head to head, and if they maybe did something like Wilder and Fury at the third fight, I'm sure it would be equally intriguing and interesting, an equally good news story.
It's been an interesting build-up, Harry, in that it's always hard with Nate Diaz to really, well, you know what to expect, but what to expect is not too much. Like if you think about the fights he's been in over his career, it must feel a little bit like, almost a little bit demeaning to be sitting at a table with Jake Paul or to be facing off with Jake Paul. I know he's getting well paid and everything else, but it's not been a huge surprise. He's maybe not been particularly vocal, particularly got into it until he's really been forced to, as we saw yesterday.
Yeah, well, that's it. What, 15 years in the UFC, like you said, for former champs and the best of the best, and then he's fighting who many people don't really classify as a real fighter. So his sort of argument is, look, my resume speaks for itself. I don't need to trash talk and promote this fight. My career does that in its own way. So I sort of get it, and it's like, people say it's him. He doesn't really do things the conventional way. You see the face to face, he just gets up and walks out, and then his excuse is, oh no, I came back, and it's a very very weird way of promoting the fight. A lot of people are reading it online saying he doesn't care and they don't know what to expect. That's really the way the Diaz brothers are, right? So yeah, I mean, does it carry over to the ring? I don't know. I feel like all of this could be forgotten about if on Saturday night, they have a really good back and forth fight, and then the promotion doesn't mean anything because the fight lived up to the hype. So it's really interesting to look into it with Diaz. I don't know what to make. I don't think anyone does. So, but all that we can really hope is he actually has put the work in, and it's a good contest on Saturday.
Donagh, you were there yesterday at the press conference. Diaz did get a little bit riled up at one point, and then, of course, as you said, the security staff decided to take matters into their own hands. Tell us about that, and as you say, update us on the latest this morning.
Yeah, so it was obviously a crazy scene. Nate very much playing his part and not allowing Jake to wind him up, but for whatever reason, Derek from Better managed to irk him. That seemed to really wind him up. He dropped an F-bomb, which the zone were not happy about. You can say all sorts of stuff on there. You can swear, but you can't swear. You're not allowed to. But you can get away with we're sorry about the language, all of that sort of stuff. It is boxing, it is MMA, it is fighting. But an F-bomb's a tough one. With the censors, they really don't love. They don't love words like that. There's really a select few that are way off limits, so that didn't go down well. Otherwise, it was relatively uneventful with the undercard. No drama or anything. No beef there. I'm just looking around the room here. We still have some fighters tipping the scales as I speak to you. Then this morning, it emerges. Jake puts out a video explaining, that Nate's team have been in touch and they're talking about suing Jake's side for someone getting punched in the brawl on stage. And then today I asked Jake, have you any update? And he says, oh, they called us and they said we were premature with that and we're sorry. So if anyone wants to see the video of Jake and I discussing that, they can go to the All Out Fighting YouTube channel and watch it right now. But it was, a lot of drama this week. I mean, it hasn't been a drama-fueled build-up, and we would have probably preferred if there was a little bit more. But it certainly hasn't been boring, and I certainly haven't had much chance to go to my hotel room and sleep during this trip.
We're not paying you to sleep, Donagh. This is very much in your contract. This fight, Harry's been mooted for a very long time. Ever since really Jake got into boxing and then specifically targeting the MMA world. You can be completely honest. How excited are you about it?
It's a tough one. I think someone made a good point online about I feel like both have more to lose than they do to gain, which is sort of carrying over to my excitement levels. I'm not. I would say I was more excited way more excited for Fury and Paul because they were sort of they're both sort of unproven in their careers at the time, and the thought that one of them has to lose was quite a big thing. So I would say I was more excited for that one, whereas this one I think if Diaz loses, a lot of people think, oh well, he was expected to lose anyway. And I know, Nikita was saying that if Paul loses, he could retire. So I feel like Paul maybe has more to lose in that sense because a 2-fight losing skid against, many who thought Fury was really not an actual boxer at the time. And then Diaz, who's at the end of his career, it could be a massive loss for him. So, and I know a win for Diaz could maybe do good things for him. He's talked about going back to the UFC, but I feel like even if he lost this one, the UFC would still have him back anyway for that third fight with Conor. So. My excitement levels are probably around maybe a 6.5, 7 out of 10. Just not as big as they were for the Fury fight for obvious reasons. I feel like there was a lot more on the line going into that one.
Donagh, having been there this week, and I'm sure you've had thoughts ever since this fight, as I said, was first talked about. Have you changed your opinion on the fight itself, whether it should be happening, whether it's a good fight, and we'll come to what's going to happen or what we think will happen in a moment, but how are you feeling about it?
Yeah, look, people talk about the size a lot. That's been a big talking point during this fight. Is Jake's so much bigger, all of this stuff. But when they face off, you don't really notice this monstrous difference. It doesn't really look like an 85-pound fighter versus a 55er. Nate was always ginormous for lightweight and even pretty big at welterweight. So, it's not as glaring. Like even the Woodley one, and Woodley's probably like thicker set than Nate, but Woodley's a lot shorter, and it didn't look it did look like at times a big mismatch size wise. So yeah, it's definitely it's been interesting. What's funny is to go back to what Harry's saying about like clearly there's less buzz for this than there was for Paul versus Fury. You had two undefeated fighters there. All of that is good stuff, and it was, of course, for UK audiences, it was all a prime time too, because it was in Saudi Arabia, just a 2-hour time difference there, so 3-hour apologies. But it was, what's been interesting this week is like online, the buzz is not there. In the YouTube boxing community, the buzz is not there, but some of the stuff is doing well. And what's really interesting is when you get to the venues for these events, there's a huge crowd. They're packed out. This place, the Factory in Deep Ellum, where the two events were. I'd imagine there'll be a big crowd at the American Airlines Center tonight. So there's a buzz in Dallas, Texas. Whether that translates to pay-per-view buys and interest online, we're going to find out.
I suppose when we have had a build-up that has been quiet, you can't. It's very, very difficult to pick anything out that either of them have said that's not the usual. I'm going to knock you out, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and do the next thing. Yeah, sure, okay. It's very hard to build interest, and once people sort of cotton on to that, then they probably will just say, you know what, I'm going to watch the fight. By Saturday night, I will decide to watch it, but until then, I'm going to tune out. And I think ultimately, people will want to see what happens when Jake Paul fights Nate Diaz.
And by the way, they announced it so early. I don't know if they were trying to get some of the shine off of the KSI and Fournier fight, but like it was announced so far in advance, and it really did, cut the wind out of the sails. I know they had planned a multi-city tour for press. They ended up just doing a launch in Dallas, but it was very early announced. Like Jake and Fury announced end of January, happens end of February. They do the face-off in London. We'd already had the years of build-up, the will they, won't they. They've been to America. They've been all over the place. They do the face-off in London. They do the press conference, the launch press conference, which Tommy doesn't go to, in Saudi. And then we get to Saudi, and it's all happening. It's all kicking off. The Furies, all of that stuff, Mike Tyson there. And this week, it's been so long since they announced it, and they never really got that click of like people being really excited about it. So we'll see how it does. I mean, they're talking about it has drawn the second biggest gate at this venue for a fight. The first one was the first UFC after COVID, so obviously that was going to be a huge draw. And they're looking at big pay-per-view numbers, and they're talking about potentially the overall purses for the two fighters being similar to Saudi, where they pay way above the odds. So there's definitely a possibility that it does well on pay-per-view. We're just going to have to see.
Touching on what Donagh was saying there about when it was announced, I remember it was April, I believe, because I was just come back from the Adesanya fight. So we're talking April 8th, and that's 4 months before the actual fight. And I know they had that launch press conference in May, but you got to realize, although we cover the sport, a lot of the casual fans almost forget it comes around to like fight weekend, like, oh, this fight's happening now. Like Donagh was saying about the Tommy and Jake one, everything was quick and it's always on people's minds. Whereas when it's got announced a month later, people almost forgetting that it was ever announced. So I do feel like that sort of shot itself in the foot in terms of promoting this fight, because we're here now in fight week, and I feel like a lot of it's only starting to pick up now, and we're what, a day from the fight. So had it maybe been announced maybe start of July, I feel like this would be a bit bigger. But April was maybe a bit of a dent for this one.
At least there is, as far as I'm aware, little, if no competition this weekend. This is basically the only major fight taking place. So, if anyone's missing their boxing and doesn't think there's a fight on, I'm sure they'll find it. And, I mean, the intrigue levels will be high. The undercard not particularly strong. I don't imagine people will be tuning in for the whole thing. But let's talk about the fight itself. We mentioned the size earlier. How much of a part do you think that's going to play, Donagh?
A little bit. I mean, Nate's big, long as well. Like like I say, it really doesn't look to me like this monster mismatch that people talk about. It doesn't look like Jake's ginormous. Obviously, he's thicker set. He's probably going to be one of the heavier punchers. And there's this idea in MMA that like Nate has this granite chin or whatever. But someone said yesterday he hasn't been knocked out. He was knocked out by Josh Thompson. It was with a kick, which isn't allowed in boxing. But he was. He has been knocked out, he has been stopped, and also he got dropped a lot by like Conor McGregor, who's at the time was a pumped up 45 pounder. So Jake is a huge power puncher. He's put down every opponent that he's fought. Granted, the Fury one was not exactly like a big powerful knockdown, nor was the one against Silva, but he did brutalize Tyron Woodley, and Nate is coming towards the end of his career. So it'll be interesting to see how Jake works with Nate's pressure and the punches that he throws. He's very unorthodox. Having just been in there with a boxer, Jake's got a new team as well. There's definitely a lot of openings. Like people talking about this like it's a foregone conclusion. Absolutely not. There's a very, very good chance that Nate gets it done here, but it certainly makes for viewing that I think if you're into the whole Jake Paul story, if you're into Nate Diaz, I think it's something you kind of have to tune into. I think there are somewhat stakes here.
And Nate Diaz's style will be an issue, won't it, Harry? I mean, I remember it's very different, but when Floyd Mayweather fought Conor McGregor and everyone was convinced, well, I think everyone, Conor McGregor fans were convinced that the Conor's MMA style was going to cause Mayweather problems. We've got a very different boxer here in Jake Paul, and he's not going to be as attuned, shall we say, to the different styles that he could face. Yes, he's fought a few MMA guys, of course, already, but you can just imagine that Diaz, not only his style, but you can imagine him climbing around as well in there and really trying to win the mental warfare.
Well, it's a funny sort of thing that a lot of people make out, and they say that if MMA fights had no time limit, Diaz brothers would be undisputed champions, right? Because they just seem to get better as it goes on and on. And you look at Nate's sort of past fights. I remember when he fought Leon, getting beat every round. Fifth round, he rocks him, but he doesn't even follow up. He sort of has this weird thing where he's like, "All right, I hurt you more than you hurt me. I won the fight." So, and obviously this is 10 rounds. I know Nate sort of joked and said he wants it to be 2 rounds because him and Nick never really talk about how much they like fighting. They almost see it as a job, right? But I think that's it. I think the only way sort of Nate is gonna win this is dragging it into deep waters. And like you said about not knowing what to expect from him, you look at his fight against Tony. He sort of just backs up himself against the cage and just looks uninterested half the time. Then he does something good but doesn't follow up. So I feel like a lot of people, if they're watching Nate for the first time in this one, they're going to be very surprised to see what they see. But I do feel like if this goes late, I know Jake went the whole 8 rounds against Tommy, but this goes 10. It's going to be interesting to see how he does in those last 2 because Nate is not to be messed with in those last rounds, and it only takes Jake to get tired and Nate to sort of turn it on, and then you never really know what can happen, regardless of how the early rounds go. So I do feel like a lot's been made about his pad work and him hitting mitts, and he said, well, that clip of him hitting mitts that everyone was talking about was his kicking coach, right? So you can only go so much off a few minutes of training footage, and I feel like it's very different when you actually have a fight, and Nate is almost the best to outlast and outgritting people. So Jake's going to be in for a tough one if this goes, anywhere near the later round, I think.
Gentlemen, to just cut in here, we have Chris Avila on the scales right now, live, using the towel again. Chris Avila will fight Jeremy. One of the last ones, yeah. He'll fight Jeremy Stevens. His last fight against Paul Bamba on Misfits Boxing. Also defeated Anthony Pretty Boy Taylor over 8 rounds on the Jake Paul vs. Tyron Woodley 2 undercard.
Undefeated in boxing, right, Donagh?
Nope. He was 0-1 when his boxing run started, but he's 3-1 now.
Good thing
Undefeated in the influencer boxing space, let's say. Defeated Dr. Mike as well on the Anderson Silva undercard. So this will be a considerable step up from Pretty Boy, a YouTuber and a journeyman in Paul Bamba. He's got a real test in Jeremy Stevens, and let's see what happens. Suspense.
You just can't buy this kind of access. We are giving this out for free, but if this continues, we might have to start introducing some sort of subscription. But one of the better fights on the undercard for sure.
Definitely. And certainly the most exciting of this recent Chris Avila run. It's really been an incredible story for Chris. Since the pandemic, he has, like you were saying, Harry, he hasn't lost since, coming back from the pandemic. He's forged a career for himself in the boxing world, and it's really been impressive to watch, because MMA, he was thrown into the deep end. He was into the UFC very early in his lifetime, and some of the results didn't go his way, but here he is. He has tipped the scales, now rehydrating, and we have Chris Avila versus Jeremy Stevens on the undercard for this. We just got a live little analysis of it, and that would be one of the last weigh-ins for the day.
we should point out Amanda Serrano, of course, in action against Heather Hardy, probably the most high-profile fight. Well, yes, certainly the most high-profile fight between two legitimate, shall we say, boxers. You mentioned the 10 rounds, Harry. Of course, the fight was originally scheduled for 8. I'm not sure if you, John, if you could just mute yourself, that'd be wonderful. As much as I love talking to you, I don't need to hear the rest of me. I can't remember who exactly put the challenge out there. I want to say it was Jake, first of all, but it is now 10 rounds. And there are questions. I mean, Jake says, best camp of his life, he's never been fitter, but, Anthony Joshua says that, but still has problems down the stretch at times. It's not necessarily about how hard you train. Sometimes you just don't have the gas tank. And you mentioned that maybe in those rounds, 8, 9, 10, that could be an issue.
Yeah, definitely. But I do think it's worth noting that I was watching a couple of Diaz's appearances on podcasts and whatnot in Lucas, and he said, obviously, fighting a 185, he said he was feeling horrible putting on the weight. I know he's fought a 170, but that 15-pound jump is a lot. It's a whole weight class in the UFC. And he said, while he's trying to pile on the pounds, he was turning up to go on runs, which he usually enjoys, and he felt sluggish. He was going to, to hit pads, and he just felt like he didn't want to do it. And although he did say that change when he sort of like changed up the diet, it's interesting because it's his heaviest weight, and who knows if he might look different because of that. He might feel more sluggish in the later rounds. I doubt it because the Diaz brothers are just known for having immense gas tanks no matter what the sort of weight is. So, but for Jake as well, I think it's a big thing. He said, obviously, even though the retirement thing's being floated around, he said his goal is still to become a world champion, and to do that, he needs to take longer fights. In his first 10 round fight, obviously the actual longest fight of Diaz's career, I believe, because UFC title fights are 25 minutes. So it's going to be interesting to see how both men are in the later rounds. I still would favour Diaz because, you could have maybe argued that he's been in the harder fights, and his cardio is known to be one of his best assets. So I do feel like he'll shine in the later ones. But even though, he's known for that, I feel like it's going to be interesting to see how he does because of the weight jump too.
Donagh, any thoughts as to whether the weight will play a part?
Yeah, I would think. I mean, I was surprised that it was such an issue for Nate in particular, but maybe it wasn't such an issue. Maybe he just wanted to, make sure of everything. But yeah, I think that he won't have been in there particularly he'll have been in there probably with people who hit harder. I wouldn't imagine that a Jake Paul punch is as hard as say a Josh Thompson kick, but it's just that the way that the boxing styles are, it's a little bit different, and yeah, I think that it will play something of a factor, but not too much.
And in terms of how you see the fight, if you imagine the fight playing out in your head, what do you see?
That is a great question that I'd love to hear Harry's answer to, because there are a lot of people in this room who I wouldn't like to hear my answer to that question.
Good thing I'm on a different side of the pond and I can safely make a prediction from the comfort of my own room. But yeah, obviously, and good thing I am, because I'm going to go with Jake. I obviously would be saying that if I was Donagh, I'd be changing my prediction. But I do feel like I'm going to go with Jake by decision. I know a lot of people maybe contradict what I was saying earlier about the whole gas tank thing, but I feel like maybe coming off the loss to Tommy, Jake would be happy just to get a win, right? If he goes for broke against someone who is notoriously hard to knock out, I think that's the smartest thing to do. And I feel like for him as well, going the whole 10 rounds against Nate and getting the win would be something to say, look, I went, 10 rounds against one of the hardest guys to finish, and this proves that I can go the distance, So I do think I'm going to go with Jake by decision. I feel like Nate might have some good moments in the fight. Like I mentioned, the Leon Edwards thing, he might, hurt Jake with a good sort of punch and mock him a bit in the fight. I know you can't really open hand slap in boxing like he does in MMA, but we'll see probably a bit of showboatery from Nate in his usual way. And then maybe he'll claim like he wins if he lands a big punch in the final round like he did with Leon. But I'm going to go with Jake by decision. I don't think it will be as close as everyone. I don't think it'll be as one-sided as a lot of people making it out to be. I think Nate will still have some good moments, but yeah, ultimately I'll go with Jake by decision.
And by the way, now that my headphones are on and nobody heard what Harry said, I agree with him.
I think I believe. You're wrong. I think Jake by stoppage is the sort of the worst odds, if you like, so the most likely outcome according to the bookmakers. But I listen from a work point of view. I always want to see a knockout. I always want to see a really bad knockout, as long as everyone gets home safely. Of course, quote from Tony Bellew there. But I think it's always hard with Jake Paul fights. They're never The second Tyrone Woodley fight, for example, was absolutely abysmal until it wasn't. And is it a worry here that it's not a great fight to watch, and he does just sort of get over the line in the end, which, let's be honest, doesn't do anyone any favours?
No, certainly. I think, like you say, for the news values of the event, we would love some sort of a big knockout. Although, like Harry said, I think you're looking at someone who's possibly a little bit too durable for that. Hopefully, a little bit more exciting, like you say. Hopefully, some big moments for Nate. But yeah, it's not. Look, I wouldn't imagine anyway that there'll be a stoppage unless we get to the later rounds, and we'll see how Jake's cardio is with the new team and everything, and with the weight cut. Was it the best weight cut? Was it the easiest weight cut, or did he perhaps have some issues? We're going to find out, and it'll be interesting.
Okay, so Jake Paul is going to beat Nate Diaz by decision. You heard it here once, twice, thrice. Very quickly, before we go, we had the news finally in the week. KSI will fight Tommy Fury in Manchester on October 14th. Logan Paul also on the card, no opponent confirmed just yet, but Dylan Dennis is the name being bandied around. Harry, I think we talked about it actually last week in terms of Logan and KSI being on the card, but we weren't quite sure if Tommy Fury was going to get over the line, but now that he has, the right fight for KSI?
You could say the right one. Obviously, it's the toughest one. I feel like he will be a big underdog in this one, but Tommy's a camp of sort of made out, and I know John Fury was saying, how do you prepare for someone like KSI? Because up until now, Fury's fought Journeyman and Jake Paul, and now he's fighting someone in KSI who has got a really bizarre style. So I think it's a tough one for KSI. If Fury wins, I know John Fury was telling us in an exclusive interview that he thinks Tommy could stay and influence the scene and go and fight Logan, and there's the rematch with Jake. But yeah, it's a really hard one for KSI. But I do think that even if he loses, it doesn't really do him that much damage, because then him and Jake have both lost. Well, who do you make the fight? KSI and Jake. That big fight is still there on the table. But if KSI wins, God, his stock goes through the roof. He will have the bragging rights over Jake for the rest of his life. The fact that he's beat the one man to defeat him, unless that changes tomorrow night. But yeah, it's a really tough one for KSI. I don't know how to see it, but I feel like Fury is the understandable favourite for this one.
It's very difficult to see a way that KSI wins that fight, just based on, like, we saw how KSI and Jake, similar power punchers. I guess JJ probably a little bit harder than Jake Paul, but it's tough to see, like, the openings that Tommy's going to leave where KSI can capitalize. And they talk about, well, if he lands this big punch, if he lands this big shot, maybe something could happen. But Tommy rode a lot of big shots on from Jake in Saudi, so it is a great fight for KSI to have taken. Finally he's got a fight where there's jeopardy. He's got a fight I said this to Mams Taylor. I said, what JJ needs for the big pay-per-view fights is he needs to be the underdog. There needs to be a belief that he could lose. There's been absolutely no prayer he was going to lose any of these fights on his comeback yet. He wasn't going to lose to Swarms. He wasn't going to lose to Luis Pineda. He wasn't going to lose to FaZe Temper, and he certainly was not going to lose to, despite the fact he's a killer and he's the WBA international champion and he was ranked in the top 15, Joe Fournier. There was no chance he was ever going to lose that fight. So we've finally got a fight that everyone is saying he probably will lose, which is the first time since the Logan Paul rematch in 2019 and the first Logan Paul fight. So it makes for a fascinating bout, and in Tommy's hometown, bringing all that noise just before Tyson fights with Francis Ngannou. It's definitely making for one of the, and Martin, this is going to make you cringe so much, but one of the biggest boxing nights of the year. I hate to say it. It's going to be a massive pay-per-view, I would think.
No, there's not. I can't disagree. We will have two of the biggest boxing nights of the year in October, both featuring Furies, neither featuring a proper boxing fight. Can we say that? I don't know. But listen, we've got another 3-month build-up for those two fights, so we'll have plenty to say on them both until then. But this weekend, it is Jake Paul against Nate Diaz. As I said, Donagh is there, and we will bring you all the reaction, all the fallout next week. Until then, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and do take care.